I'll make him pay for what he did, discovering the truth behind the resurrection of the dead in prison. Why is he here? What is the truth behind his punishment? Aaron stood in the cold, dimly lit courtroom, his hands shackled to the metal chair. The air was thick with tension, the walls of the room seeming to close in on him with every passing moment. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, their whispers of judgment echoing around the sterile stone walls. The harsh light from the overhead lamps cast shadows across his face, making him feel like a prisoner, not just in the physical sense, but in every aspect of his life. His heart raced as the judge's voice echoed in the silence, declaring him guilty of treason, of betraying the government. But Iran wasn't surprised. He knew this was coming. It's because of him, Aaron thought bitterly. That damn politician. He glanced toward the back of the room, his gaze locking on the man who had orchestrated it all. The same politician Iran had punched months ago after he watched him carelessly run over a young girl with his hovercraft, never stopping to check if she was okay. The man had been too arrogant to acknowledge the tragedy, too powerful to care. Iran had struck him in a burst of anger, unable to let the injustice slide. The politician was sitting in the back of the courtroom, his face twisted into a smug grin. He caught Iran's eye, and the brief, silent exchange was enough. Aaron could see the malicious satisfaction in the man's eyes. This is revenge, Aaron realized. He's the one pulling the strings. Aaron's anger flared, his chest tightening as he clenched his jaw. He wanted to scream, to lash out, but the chains on his wrists held him in place, the weight of his fate pressing down on him. The courtroom was silent again, but to Aaron it felt like the room was closing in even more, the air suffocating. The judgment had already been decided. He was nothing but a pawn in someone else's game. Aaron opened his eyes, squinting against the darkness. His back ached from the cold stone beneath him. He groaned softly, struggling to sit up. The pain shot through his ribs. His thin, gaunt body trembled from the effort. His face was covered in dirt, his black hair matted with sweat. A few days' growth of stubble covered his chin, his once clear blue eyes now clouded with exhaustion. His skin was pale, his hands swollen from the cuffs that had bound him for days. "Get up, prisoner," Mira's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She stood in the doorway, framed by the dim light from the hallway. Tall and commanding, Mira was a force to be reckoned with. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, revealing her pale, angular face. Her cold gray eyes scanned him with a quiet intensity, missing nothing. She wore the standard guard uniform, black, tight, and efficient, designed for both comfort and intimidation. Her posture was rigid, like she was carved from stone, every movement precise and controlled. She stood there for a moment, not speaking, her gaze locked on Aaron as if she were waiting for him to break. "Don't make me come in there," she added, her voice low but filled with authority. Aaron slowly pulled himself to his feet, wincing with every movement. His hands were raw, his wrists bloody from the cuffs. "What do you want?" he rasped, his voice hoarse from days of silence. "You know why I'm here," she replied, her tone flat, unreadable. She stepped forward, unlocking the heavy door with a metallic click. The harsh sound echoed off the stone walls. Aaron eyed her warily. Despite the hard exterior, there was something about Mira that didn't sit right with him. She wasn't like the other guards. There was an almost imperceptible hesitation in her eyes when she looked at him, a flicker of doubt, something that made her seem less certain than the rest. He had no idea why she still hadn't broken him, why she didn't enjoy watching him suffer like the others. "Get out," she ordered. He hesitated for a moment, eyes locked with hers. He knew better than to challenge her, but the anger inside him burned. It was all he had left. "I didn't do it," he muttered, his voice barely audible. Mira's expression didn't change. She stepped back, motioning for him to leave the cell. "I know," she said quietly, almost to herself, "but that's not for you to decide." Aaron's chest tightened. He'd been accused of treason, betraying his people, working to bring down the government, but he was innocent, and no one believed him. He had no chance in the trial, no chance to explain. He had been left to rot in this place, a forgotten man on a dying world. Mira didn't speak again, and the silence between them stretched thin. She watched as he shuffled past her, his shoulders hunched in defeat. Aaron's gaze flickered to the gray walls of the prison. Nothing had changed. The walls were as cold and unforgiving as ever. The only thing that had shifted was the strange tension between him and Mira. She wasn't like the others. There was something more to her, something buried deep within her gaze that he couldn't quite place. As he walked past her, Mira's eyes lingered on him for a moment longer than necessary. She wasn't cold. She was distant. But there was something unsettling about her. He could feel it in the air between them. Maybe one day, Iran muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. You'll understand. Mira didn't respond, her hands still resting on the cell door, her fingers tight around the cold metal. She didn't know what had made her hesitate, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't lying. Not completely. As Iran disappeared into the darkness of the hallway, she stood still, her expression hardening again, slipping back into the role she had been forced into. She was the guard, and he was the prisoner. Nothing more. Mira was a figure of strict authority in the prison. She walked through the dark, cold halls with unflinching resolve, her steps heavy and purposeful. Guards and prisoners alike spoke of her with a mix of respect and fear. She's a machine, they would mutter, no heart, no soul. Her reputation was built on her cold efficiency. She had no time for mercy, no tolerance for weakness. Every rule was followed without exception, and every violation was punished without hesitation. In the prison, Mira's name was synonymous with discipline. Her uniform was always impeccable, her posture rigid. She didn't show kindness or compassion. Her eyes were like ice, hard and calculating, scanning the cells with a look that could freeze anyone in place. If a prisoner broke down or begged, it meant nothing to her. Pain was simply another tool to maintain control. "She's not like the others," whispered one prisoner to another, his voice trembling. "Mira, she's pure ice. No mercy, no hesitation. When she walks through the halls, you feel it in your bones. The guards, they can look away, but not her. Not once have I seen her break the rules." He paused, his eyes darting around as if the mention of her name would draw her attention. "I saw it once. One of the new guys tried to run, tried to escape. You should have heard the sound of that whip. She hit him so hard the crack echoed down the corridor. He didn't move for hours." The other prisoner shuddered, shaking his head. "But it's not just the punishments. It's how she looks at you, like she's reading your soul. You can feel her judgment. No one talks back to her, not even the other guards. She's their boss, their nightmare. If she even sees you flinch, you're done for." The first prisoner sighed, looking away. "No one's safe when she's around." When Mira entered Aaron's cell, the atmosphere shifted. Her presence alone forced him into silence. She never asked how he felt or if he was in pain. She didn't need to. He was a prisoner, and she was there to ensure that he remembered his place. Each morning she delivered his punishment with the same cold efficiency, her hands moving swiftly, her gaze unyielding. Aaron had never seen her flinch, not once, no matter how harsh the treatment. Prisoners talked about her in the mess hall, their voices hushed as if speaking her name could draw her attention. "You don't want to cross Mira," they whispered. "She'll break you without even trying." Even the other guards were wary of her. They knew she was quick to reprimand anyone who stepped out of line, and her methods were always severe. Mira didn't waste time with pleasantries or false sympathy. She did what was necessary to keep the order, and that was enough for her. The suffering of the prisoners, including Aaron, was merely part of the system. To her, it was all about control, maintaining the peace by any means necessary. Aaron barely slept. His eyes stayed open in the darkness, always watching, always thinking. His body ached, but his mind was sharp. He learned to separate the pain, to bury it deep within himself, and focus on survival. Each day he studied the prison's layout, every corner, every guard's routine. He found small flaws in the system, blind spots in the cameras, gaps in the security shifts. He began gathering scraps, metal pieces, wires, anything he could use to create makeshift devices. During his hours of forced labor, Aaron worked quietly, pretending to be just another prisoner, but always planning. With the help of a few trusted inmates, he set up a secret network. They passed tools under the table, exchanged quiet words when the guards weren't watching. Every night, Aaron worked in the shadows, chipping away at the prison's infrastructure. His hands, covered in dirt and grime, carefully crafted small explosive devices from stolen components. He disabled cameras, jammed the security systems, and silently destroyed the prison's data files. It was only the beginning, but it was a start. One evening, as he huddled in the corner of the prison yard, one of his fellow prisoners, a wiry man with a sharp mind, whispered to him, "I've got the blueprints. We can use the ventilation shafts. It'll get us outside, but we have to time it perfectly." Aaron nodded, his heart pounding. The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Aaron pressed his hand to his chest, focusing on his breath. "I can do this. We'll get out," he said quietly, "but you have to make sure the others are ready." The days passed in slow motion. Aaron felt the tension building, the sense of impending action clawing at him. Mira had noticed the change. Her gaze followed him now, sharp and suspicious. She saw the subtle shift in his behavior. His movements were deliberate, his focus unbroken. His once broken spirit was now replaced by an unsettling calm. The other prisoners were whispering. She caught their murmurs, but pretended not to hear. One evening, as she entered his cell to check on him, she stopped short. Aaron was sitting, his back against the cold wall, his face expressionless. "You're planning something," she said, her voice steady but laced with suspicion. Aaron didn't flinch. "I'm just surviving." She stepped closer, her gaze narrowing. "Surviving or plotting?" He met her eyes. "Is there a difference?" Mira stood silent for a moment, her mind racing. The doubt she had tried to push aside was growing stronger. "Don't make me stop you," she finally said, her voice colder than before. But there was a flicker in her eyes, just a moment's hesitation. "Do what you must," Aaron replied. His voice was calm, almost peaceful, but the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. As she left the cell, Mira's thoughts were tangled, her steps uncertain. Aaron's resistance, his calm defiance, had become more than she could ignore. She had always done her job without question, without feeling. But now, standing in the hallway, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to change. One evening, as the dim light of the prison's flickering lamps cast long shadows in the mess hall, Mira sat across from Clara, her longtime friend and confidant. She stirred her cup of coffee, absently, her fingers tracing the rim. "I don't know if I've ever told you this, but I've always thought of him as more than just a superior," Mira began softly, her voice carrying a weight of years of unspoken feelings. Clara, noticing the serious tone, raised an eyebrow. "The warden?" she asked. Mira sat across from Clara, her voice softer than usual as she spoke, her memories drifting back to a time when things were simpler. "You know, I was just a kid when I lost my parents," she began, her gaze distant. "I had nowhere to go, no one to turn to. But then, he found me, the warden. He took me in when no one else would." Mira paused, her eyes glistening with the remnants of old gratitude. "He didn't just give me a roof over my head. He taught me everything. Discipline, responsibility. He gave me purpose when I had none." She leaned forward, her fingers gripping the table. "He never treated me like an orphan. I was his daughter in every way that mattered. He made sure I had everything I needed. Education, training, even protection from others who tried to hurt me." She smiled faintly. "I remember him standing up to the other guards when they tried to bully me. He told them, 'She's under my protection. Touch her and you answer to me.'" Mira's voice faltered slightly as she added, "He made me feel safe, Clara. Like I mattered. He was the father I never had." Clara studied her closely, her expression unreadable. "You really believe that?" she asked quietly. Mira didn't answer immediately, her eyes clouded with conflicting emotions. "I want to," she whispered. "I've always believed that he cared for me. He's the reason I am who I am today. I don't know what I'd do without him." Mira was in the hallway when she heard voices. The door to the warden's office was slightly ajar. She stopped, straining to hear. The warden's voice was unmistakable, deep and authoritative, but the other voice, calm and calculating, belonged to his assistant. "We're nearing the final stages of the project," the assistant said. Once we have full control of the regeneration technology, there's no telling what we can accomplish. We can even bring back the dead, create an army. I know, the warden interrupted. And that's why we had to eliminate the threat. The parents of that girl were too close. They were getting too close to perfecting it. They didn't understand what they were creating. Mira's breath caught in her throat. The words hit her like a blow. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as she stood frozen in place, listening. They had to die, the warden continued, his tone flat, businesslike. Their work was a tool, a key to my power. We couldn't let it fall into the wrong hands. Mira, she'll never know. It's for the greater good. Mira's heart pounded in her chest, the shock of his words sinking in. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what she had just heard. Her parents, the ones she had always believed to have died in an accident, were murdered. Not just murdered, they were killed because their work, their breakthrough, posed a threat to the warden's plans. Her entire life, the man she had trusted, the man she had called her guardian, had been the one to orchestrate their deaths. He had lied to her, used her, and she had never known. A cold shiver ran down Mira's spine. She couldn't breathe. She had been nothing more than a tool, an instrument in his twisted game. She leaned against the wall for support, feeling as if the ground beneath her feet was slipping away. She took a step back, her mind reeling with the realization, her eyes blurred with unshed tears. How could I have been so blind? She whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. The warden's words echoed in her head, each one like a hammer striking her heart. She had been raised by a killer, betrayed by the one person she had trusted the most. And worse still, he had never once shown the slightest sign of guilt. Mira wiped the tears from her eyes, forcing herself to focus. She couldn't let this go. She couldn't let him get away with it. I'll make him pay, she muttered under her breath, her voice trembling, but full of a cold, determined fury. Mira spent hours in the warden's office, her hands shaking as she sifted through the stacks of files. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the rustling of paper. She had known something wasn't right, but this was more than she could have imagined. Hidden among the documents was the truth. Her parents, the brilliant scientists she had admired all her life, had created a technology that could regenerate tissue, heal wounds, and even bring the dead back to life. The warden had always seemed like the person who took care of her after their deaths, but in truth, he had killed them to steal their discovery. The invention was far beyond mere healing. It was a weapon. It could resurrect the dead, turning them into soldiers who would never age, never die. The warden had taken that power for himself, using it to create an army of immortals. They were his enforcers, his loyal, unkillable soldiers. The prison itself wasn't just a place for punishment. It was a factory for his army. The very guards who tormented the prisoners were part of this twisted system, raised from death to serve the warden's desires. Mira stood in the dark corner of the cell, her mind reeling as she processed everything she had learned about the resurrection technology. So this is what it really does, she thought, her voice almost audible in her mind. It doesn't just heal the body, it rewrites it, gives the dead a new, twisted life. It's like they're trapped inside their own skin, their souls erased, replaced with some kind of mechanical obedience. She recalled the soldiers she had seen, their glassy eyes, the stiff, controlled movements. They're not human anymore, Mira thought, clenching her fists. They're just puppets, walking around with no minds of their own. No thoughts, no feelings, just commands. Her breath quickened as the weight of the truth pressed down on her. My parents, they were working on something beautiful, something that could heal, but he used it to control, to create an army of the dead. He turned their legacy into a weapon. She shuddered, the horror of it sinking in deeper. This is not life. It's a mockery of life, and it's all because of him, the warden. Mira's stomach twisted. Her parents hadn't died in a lab accident like she had been told. They had been murdered by the very man she had called her protector, the man who had promised to keep her safe. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had spent years idolizing the warden, thinking he was her father figure, her savior. In truth, he was the monster who had torn her family apart. She could feel the weight of the documents in her hands, the truth she had uncovered too heavy to ignore. Her entire life had been a lie. The warden had stolen her family's legacy, turned it into a tool of war, and used her as a pawn in his cruel game. He hadn't just controlled her with lies, he had used her to build his empire. Her heart pounded in her chest and anger surged through her veins. She had to act. She couldn't stay here, not under his control. The walls that once seemed like a shield now felt like a cage, and Mira's rage burned bright. But she couldn't escape alone. She needed help. Without thinking, she made her way to Aaron's cell. She had watched him over the past weeks, seen the quiet rebellion in his eyes. There was strength in him, something more than the broken man he had once been. If anyone could help her take down the warden, it was him. She couldn't trust the guards or the system anymore. They were all a part of his twisted world. Aaron, with his determination, was the only person who could understand the gravity of what she had just uncovered. When she reached his cell, she hesitated for a moment, her hand on the cold metal bars. The world outside seemed so distant, so unreachable, but she couldn't go back now. The truth was out, and she had no choice but to face it. She pulled the keys from her belt and unlocked the cell door. Aaron looked up at her, surprised. He had been silent for days, his eyes always focused on something beyond the prison walls, always lost in thought. She stepped inside, locking eyes with him. "I know what they did to my parents," she said, her voice low but filled with urgency. "And I know what the warden is doing. He's building an army, using the technology they created. The guards, they're not human. They're his soldiers. We can't just stay here anymore. I need your help." Aaron stood up slowly, his eyes narrowing. "You want to take him down?" he asked, his voice hoarse from days of silence. Mira nodded. "We have to. He's been using us, using everything for his own power. This prison, it's not just a prison, it's a weapon." Aaron's gaze hardened, the fire of determination rekindling in his eyes. He nodded slowly. "Then let's get out of here." The plan was no longer about escape. It was about destruction, and for the first time in years, Mira felt a spark of hope. Together, they would destroy the warden's empire. Together, they would free the prisoners and bring an end to the warden's reign. Mira sat across from Clara in the dim light of the mess hall, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't stay here any longer, Clara. I've made a choice. I'm helping Iran escape, and I need you with me." Clara looked at her, her eyes wide with concern, but after a long pause, she nodded. "I knew this day would come," Clara said, her voice steady. "You've been stuck here too long. I'm in. I'll do whatever it takes to help." Mira's heart raced with relief as Clara reached out, placing a hand on her arm. "We'll get out together. Just promise me you'll be careful." Mira's steps were swift and heavy as she moved through the prison corridors. Her fingers curled tightly around the set of keys in her hand. She couldn't ignore the truth anymore. The warden's lies had torn her world apart, and she couldn't stay loyal to someone who had murdered her parents. The decision had been made. She reached Aaron's cell, her heart pounding. He looked up when she entered but said nothing. His eyes, usually guarded, were searching. She saw the hesitation in his gaze. The weight of her betrayal wasn't lost on him. He had always known that her loyalty to the warden ran deep, and now it was shattered. "I'm with you," Mira said quietly, locking eyes with him. "We take this place down, together." Aaron stood, his movements slow and deliberate. "We'll need to move fast," he said, his voice steady. Mira nodded. "I know. I've been watching. The guards, the cameras, the shifts. We have a chance." For the next few days, they spoke in whispers, their plans forming in secret. Mira's heart raced every time she snuck into Aaron's cell. Her mind was sharp, focused on how to bring the warden's empire crashing down. She'd mapped out the weak points in the system, the blind spots in the security cameras, the blind spots in the guards' patrols, the places where they could hide explosives. Every conversation was a step closer to escape. Every plan they devised was a defiance against the system that had held them captive. One night, as Mira slipped into Iran's cell, she could feel the tension in the air. The plan was in motion now. There was no turning back. She'd convinced herself she could do it, that she could make things right. The anger burned inside her, but so did a sense of purpose she had never known before. "They'll be waiting for us," Aaron said, his expression unreadable. Mira's lips tightened into a line. "Then we give them a reason to fear us." They spent the following days gathering the necessary materials, tools, explosives, anything they could get their hands on. Mira would disable the cameras, rendering the security system useless, while Iran spoke to the other prisoners, preparing them for the escape. There was no room for mistakes, no time for second-guessing. Every movement had to be precise. Mira's role was clear. She had the knowledge to shut down the surveillance system. Aaron would be the one to rally the prisoners, to lead them once the walls fell. Together, they would burn the system to the ground. On the night they planned to make their move, Mira stood by the steel bars of the prison yard, her gaze fixed on the cold, dark sky above. She had been in this prison for so long, trapped by lies and betrayal. But now everything was about to change. She thought of her parents, how they had trusted the warden, how they had believed in him, and she thought of the pain he had caused. The anger she had carried for so long was now a fire that fueled her every decision. Aaron approached her, his face calm, but with the same fire burning in his eyes. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low. Mira turned to face him, her heart beating faster. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a prisoner. "Let's go," she said, a fierce determination in her voice. Side by side, they stepped into the darkness, no longer just prisoners, but rebels with a shared purpose. Together, they would tear down the walls of their prison and bring an end to the warden's reign. There was no turning back now. They were in this together, no matter what happened next. Mira and Aaron crouched behind a stack of crates in the prison yard. The plan was in motion. Mira's hands shook slightly as she pulled out the jammer. "We'll disable the cameras first," she whispered to Aaron. "Then the lights, the alarms. Once everything's down, we make a run for the east gate." Aaron checked the hallway. "We know the guard's shifts. We can do this." Together they moved swiftly, their steps light, but their hearts heavy with the knowledge that there was no turning back now. Mira disabled the first camera with a quick flick of the wrist. The flickering lights overhead buzzed and went dark. In the sudden darkness, they raced toward the east gate. Aaron forced the lock open, his eyes scanning the yard for any sign of movement. They could see the freedom just beyond the steel bars, the outside world waiting. But as they neared the gate, a voice rang out from behind them. "You think you can escape?" Mira froze. Standing before them was the warden, flanked by his assistant and several soldiers. Mira's pulse quickened as her eyes took in the soldiers. They weren't like regular men. They moved with stiff, robotic precision, their faces pale, their eyes glassy and empty. "They're dead," Mira muttered, her voice barely audible. "You've used the technology on them." The warden smirked, stepping forward. "Of course, what better way to ensure my reign? I resurrect the dead and make them my army. Your parents were fools, Mira. They thought they could change the world. But in the end, it was just a tool to increase my power." Mira's blood ran cold. "You killed them," she spat. "You killed my family to steal their work. And now you've turned the dead into your puppets." The warden's face twisted into a cruel smile. "You're naive, Mira. Your parents' invention was always meant to serve me. You were just too blind to see it." Mira clenched her fists, the rage boiling inside her. "I'll never serve you," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You're a monster." Behind the warden, Clara stepped forward, her face pale, eyes darting around. Mira's heart sank. Clara, the one person she thought she could trust, was standing there with the warden, her eyes avoiding Mira's gaze. Mira's voice shook with disbelief. "Clara, no, you didn't." "I had no choice," Clara said, her voice faltering. I thought if I helped him, I could protect myself. He promised me promotions, power. I'm sorry, Mira. I never meant for this to happen." Mira's eyes filled with betrayal. "You've sold me out for a promotion? After everything we've been through?" Clara took a step closer, her eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to hurt you, but he said I would lose everything if I didn't help him. I had no choice." The warden chuckled darkly. "You're pathetic, Clara. Weak, just like your friend." The tension in the yard exploded as gunfire erupted. Mira and Aaron dove behind cover, returning fire. The warden's soldiers fired back, their undead bodies jerking unnaturally with each shot. Mira's heart raced as she fired, her aim sharp, her resolve solidifying. But her mind kept drifting to Clara. Clara stood frozen for a moment, eyes wide with fear. The warden's voice rang out. "You see, Mira, everyone is expendable, even your closest allies." Before Mira could react, Clara moved forward, positioning herself between Mira and a soldier who had aimed directly at her. She shoved Mira out of the way, taking the bullet meant for her. Mira screamed as Clara crumpled to the ground, her breath shallow. "Clara!" she cried, rushing to her side. Clara's blood stained the dirt beneath them. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. I never wanted this. Please forgive me." Mira's hands shook as she held Clara's lifeless body, tears streaming down her face. "You were my friend." "How could you?" Mira whispered. Clara's eyes fluttered one last time. "I'm sorry." And then she was gone. Fury surged through Mira. She wiped her tears away, her body shaking with rage. This was it. The moment she had dreaded, the moment she had always feared, had come to pass. But now there was no time for grief. With a roar, Mira stood, gun raised. "I'll make you pay," she screamed, her voice filled with rage and determination. She fired, hitting the warden's assistant in the chest, sending him crashing to the ground. The warden snarled, pulling his own weapon, but Mira was faster. She shot him in the shoulder, causing him to stagger back. Aaron moved quickly, taking out another soldier as Mira reloaded. The battlefield was chaotic, but their focus remained on one thing: the warden. The dead soldiers fell one by one as they cut through the ranks. Mira moved with a precision she hadn't known she was capable of, each shot calculated, each movement bringing them closer to victory. With one final decisive shot, Mira hit the warden in the chest. He stumbled back, his face contorted with disbelief. "You think you've won," he hissed, his voice cold with venom. Mira stepped forward, her gun aimed directly at his heart. "Yes," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's over." The warden's body jerked and collapsed, his life finally extinguished. The undead soldiers, once animated by the warden's twisted technology, fell silent, their bodies returning to the death they had been forced to escape. Mira stood over the warden's body, her chest heaving, her body trembling from the adrenaline. Aaron stood beside her, his face hard but proud. "We did it," Aaron said, his voice low but strong. Mira nodded, tears still in her eyes but with a look of finality on her face. "It's over. It's finally over." The fight was over. The warden lay dead, and the undead soldiers who had once served him now lay still, their twisted existence erased. Mira and Aaron stood in the ruined courtyard, looking at the remains of the prison, an empire of cruelty and lies now turned to dust. They had won, but the victory came with a heavy price. They knew they couldn't stay. There was no future here, not after everything they had seen and lost. The idea of staying in this forsaken place, with its memories of death and oppression, was unbearable. Mira turned to Aaron, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We need to leave. We can't let anyone know what we've done. We can't be the ones they hunt next." Aaron nodded. "We'll send the message anonymously. The galaxy needs to know what happened here. They need to understand the truth, but not at the cost of our lives." They crafted a letter, a confession of everything that had transpired, of the warden's rise to power, the horrors of his immortality project, and the lives lost in his pursuit of control. They sent it to the Galactic Council, careful to leave no trace of their involvement. No one would know who they were, but the message would reach those who had the power to act. It was the first step in bringing the warden's empire to justice. Once the message was sent, they left the ruined planet behind. The journey was long and difficult, but they pressed on. They needed to find somewhere new, a place where they could rebuild, where the ghosts of their past wouldn't follow them. A fresh start. After weeks of travel, they finally found a quiet, remote world, lush with forests and rolling hills. The air was clean, and the sky was a deep blue, something they hadn't seen in far too long. It was nothing like the prison, nothing like the desolation they had escaped. For the first time in what felt like forever, Mira and Aaron could breathe again. Mira stood at the edge of a quiet graveyard, her gaze fixed on the simple stone marker. The wind rustled through the trees as she knelt, placing a hand on the gravestone of her parents. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I couldn't save you, but I've made sure this will never happen again. I will carry your legacy. You didn't die in vain." Tears began to fall as Mira let the weight of everything wash over her. The grief she had carried for so long, of losing her parents, of the betrayal, of the years spent in a world of lies, finally found its release. Aaron stood behind her, quietly supportive, until he stepped forward and knelt beside her. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft but firm. "You didn't just survive, Mira. You fought. You changed everything." Mira looked up at him, her tear-streaked face softening into a smile. "We changed everything. Together." They stayed there in the quiet graveyard for a while, letting the peace of the place settle over them. There were no more lies, no more fear, just the promise of a new life. And with that, they walked away from the past, ready to face the future with hope. Mira and Iran walked hand in hand through the quiet fields, the weight of their past slowly lifting with every step. The graveyard behind them, where Mira had laid her parents to rest, now felt like a chapter closed. They had fought for freedom, for justice, and for a future they thought they'd never have. The message they sent would spark change, but they remained anonymous, silent heroes in a galaxy that would never know their names. As they reached the edge of a serene village, the horizon bathed in the golden light of a setting sun, they realized that this place, this peace, was the beginning of something new. They had escaped the darkness, but they also carried the light of hope forward. Together they had defied tyranny, rebuilt their lives, and found strength in each other. Freedom wasn't just about survival, it was about choosing a future. And for the first time in years, they felt truly free.